Hello, friends. I don't know if you have someone like this in your life, but if you do, I strongly suggest that you hang on tight to them. So I am really excited to share Jessica Benstock with you because she is somebody that I honor and value because she has this uncanny ability to take a subject and flip it upside down, poke holes in it, look at it from all these different perspectives that sometimes feel challenging, might even feel threatening at times. And she does it with this deep sense of curiosity, even when there's not clarity there. And I encourage you to hold those people tight because it takes a lot of fucking deep personal work to be able to land in that place. And so that's the place that I really honor in Jess's own personal development journey. Folks like Jess help me really understand where my own blind spots are. And this is her fourth time being on this podcast. And when I zoomed out and I looked at these conversations that we've had before, there's a common thread that weaves its way through each of these episodes. So in episode 10, we talk about learning from instead of running away from our triggers. We talked about emotional alchemy, so specifically de-shaming narcissistic and empathic traits in episode 32. And then in episode 56, we were talking about bridging the ideological chasms about the thing that must not be named. And I think that y'all know what I mean when I say the thing that must not be named, giving the context that this episode was recorded, I think back in 2021. So when I sit with somebody like Jess, who is willing to go to these sticky, crunchy places, I mean, even in the personal development and spiritual world, there are belief systems. And when you find somebody who's able to do that from a balanced place, from a regulated place, that's actually a bit of a rarity. So I'm really excited to share this conversation with you, which is really about the transformative journey of honoring values and tradition and healing. And a lot of our conversation is going to be grappling with a lot of the insecurities that we, or rather many of us, have experienced as coaches and healers. This experience of feeling like you're not enough because you don't have a fancy degree or a fancy certification, or even on the side where you do have the titles and the gold stars all racked up and you still feel a bit like an imposter. I want you to listen to this episode with your heart open because there are so many of us who go through that experience and feel so alone in that experience. And when we dissect this common yet nuanced struggle in the coaching field, we're able to normalize this experience and take some of that shame out of that sticky edge. So we are going to grapple with the potential risks of systemizing living traditional wisdom and how that actually leads to a loss of depth and disconnection from our intuition. And everything that we're talking about here is really a compass back into leading from intuition. We untangle the intricacies of how our past experiences, both Jess's and mine, shape our emotional triggers and how that affects our ability to hold space. We explore how to navigate the foreign territories of receiving and accepting peace and happiness in personal growth. That's actually harder to do and practice than it is to say. And then the significance of nurturing our values and our intentions. Jess also shares her insights on the importance of intention and fulfillment and how finding joy in unconventional choices can lead to a more satisfying and fulfilling life. Now, Jessica is a practitioner who has 14 years of experience training practitioners in multiple modalities of somatic trauma healing, subconscious reprogramming, and transformational work. She pulls from a breadth and depth of training from indigenous ritual study to Western psychology to esoteric mystery traditions. Her service is to humanity through working with leaders and practitioners who seek to serve the higher purpose of awakening. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jessica Benstock. Welcome to the Rooted Business Podcast. Today, I've got the lovely Jessica Benstock here, and she's been on the podcast several times now, and So if you are vibing with her, go check out and just do a search within this podcast and go look for her. I honestly feel like our conversation about narcissism is like one of my favorite podcast episodes that I've ever recorded. That was so much fun. And I love taking these things that we just sort of um, like assume to be true and flipping them on its head. And I feel like we did that in the narcissism conversation. And I'm really looking forward to this one because I think that we're going to do the same thing here. So,
Great.
Jess, I've asked you on to chat specifically about um, holding space. You know, you are a amazing teacher and mentor for practitioners, and I think that there's this silent, perhaps unspoken, but sort of like deeply rooted insecurity or fear with a lot of coaches that because I don't have a credential, because I don't have this fancy piece of paper, because I haven't studied with so and so, like, do I even deserve to be holding space? And so that's the concept I think that it's going to be fun to unpack with you. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to dive into it. And I just love the angles that you and I can dive into because we're both a little bit rebellious with big, big hearts.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like that speaks so much to like safety, and the safety that I feel with you specifically is like we can go months and months and months not talking and just drive straight in and be like, okay, like leave the like fluffy superficial like bullshit out and like let's just get straight into the juice of it. So I really appreciate that you're open and not judgmental. And like a lot of times when we're recording a podcast, like I know that for me, I'm like actively like like massaging a concept before it even feels like fully real. And yeah, I just love doing that with you.
Yeah, same. I love the phrasing massaging a concept because it is like that. It's like the surface places where there's the crunchy bits that we kind of notice as a symptom, and then what's actually going on more in a more deep
Mhm. Yeah.
takes us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Sweet. So let's first start with this like just so that people can sort of like recognize themselves in this conversation. I know that I've struggled with this as I was like transitioning from being an acupuncturist and being highly credentialed, having all the different papers into coaching and feeling like, you know, I feel like I'm really good at this coaching thing, but I don't have like a physical sort of like demarcation that I'm quote unquote allowed to coach. And
Mm,
so I think um, if we can sort of like unpack like where those thought patterns come from, I know where they came from in my story, but like I'm sure you see this so much in your clients.
mhm.
And like maybe sort of fleshing out the like sticky edges first, like as you're saying, the crunchy bits at the surface layers of the muscle, and then we'll sort of like get into the deeper layers of the fascia.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious from your end how you notice it. I definitely think that we come from a culture that trains us to have a name tag and a business card and a title. And I think that there's a lot of like externalization of our value on titles. I think that's just kind of, it's not just the Western world, but it is westernized worlds that do it. You should be an engineer or you should be a doctor, you should be a lawyer. Yeah, because it makes money, but also like, how does it make the family look? How does it make you look?
Mhm.
How are you going to be accepted in social, society? How are people going to talk about you? Are they going to give you a weird eyebrow? Are they going to be like, oh, wow, you do that, And there's definitely a lot of that programming culturally that's very tied up, I think. And who am I to be doing this? Do I have a certification? Do I not? And in specific, I mean, I'm very curious to hear about your experience because, like, acupuncture, I know if you guys don't know that world, like the level of tests you have to do, and then if you're in like different states, the level of more testing that you have to do.
And if you want to specialize, there's even more tests. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So it's thick and I mean, it's a huge body of work. So it
Mhm.
makes sense that, you want to know what you're doing, but it's like a sneaky thing in the background that starts to maybe inform how we see ourselves once we get the piece of paper and we can have the plaque on the wall. And so,
And the letters behind your name, like all those sort of like demarcations of what westernized culture considers to be valuable and worthy. And
yeah.
I think acupuncture is specifically a really interesting sort of uh I want to call it an industry, is because it came from a really traditional, really sort of like grassroots. You learn from the healer in your village, and like way back in the day, acupuncturists, we used to call them barefoot doctors, like didn't even like receive payment for their services. It's like everyone in the village knew to take care of the barefoot doctor and would regularly send food, would help them out, and like would support that person so that when someone in your family got sick, it was just you stepped in, right? And so it wasn't this transactional business type relationship before Mel, essentially. And what I want to be really careful because I think that, the acupuncture world is like a very, very important part of our medical system now. And so I don't want to like trash it, but I also see where, sort of the magic of the medicine has been stripped away. Um, and, the testing that you just spoke of is really just, can you memorize this list of points? Can you memorize this list of herbs? And like someone has a headache, and which of these cookbook recipes would you use to treat that headache? And
Mm.
to me, that is not at all what acupuncture came from. A lot of it came from Taoist philosophy and looking at nature and looking at the balance and imbalance within nature and being like, oh, hey, like the human body is not all that different. And, sort of choosing points in a more like intuitive and esoteric way.
Yeah.
And so like the credentialing system within acupuncture specifically, I feel like has taken away a lot of that magic that and that's one of the fears that I have for the coaching industry is like, yes, I'm a little bit of a rebel. Yes, I like to think outside the box, but I've seen in the world of acupuncture where that has gone not as intended, perhaps. And we've sort of systemized things to the point that we've lost the magic of the thing. Um,
That's such an interesting way to say that. I mean, sorry, were you gonna
no, go ahead. Take it.
there's something about when we systemize things that originally came from a living principle. And it's not to say that like something like acupuncture, which I think is a great example, is like you said, like it comes from Taoist principles. It comes from the living essence of life, of
Mhm,
creation, and the spirit within that, and the intuition within that, and thousands of years of people studying this like living wisdom.
mhm,
And there are systems within it, but those systems are built from what's been observed in
mhm.
nature and what's been observed through those forces so that they're honoring the principles
Yeah.
versus, I think, systemizing things the way the Western world does under the guise of like, let's make sure that we're really safe, or let's make sure that this thing, and who knows, I'm sure there's other, when you get lots of money and monopolies, and we don't have to go into that, but like there's a lot of forces that come in, especially to the medical system with
Yeah.
um where teaching and curriculum goes. But when you systemize something that is inherently built from the living principles, the living wisdom of these forces,
Yeah.
you don't learn from the systems and then grow something within what you've learned from listening as a student, which all the wisdom traditions, all the healing traditions, all the indigenous healing traditions, like every kind of tradition that holds these grains and powerful experiences of truth have, the system is informed by that living flow
Mm-hmm.
versus the system being kind of put on something to fit it into a box. And
Yeah.
I think that westernized, I mean, oh, geez, the westernized world does that to us in general. Like, you need to
Yeah.
be like, you talk like this, you need to dress like this, you need to
Yes.
act like this, to be accepted. And so we kind of contort ourselves into the box. And what do we do in that process? Well, as people, I think we lose connection to our own souls that we eventually wake up to and have to deprogram,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So,
And I
yeah.
think the thing that you're talking about here is like when we systemize a thing, we lose the nuance of the thing.
Mm,
We like forget to leave room for the magic, you know, because I know that it's happened with me both in coaching and in acupuncture where there's principles that I also follow within or within coaching, like there's things within biology, within like the nervous system, within like just mindful and conscious communication that sort of follow through. That's kind of the structure that, my coaching practice is built on. Um, but then sometimes you use a tool and it doesn't turn out exactly the way that you've been taught it should, in quotation marks, turn out, and when we have these systemized, like these rigid systems, we can't really, like, our ego butts up against that, like that outlier. And instead of being like, okay, well, I wonder what's happening here and being curious about it, and then following that thread and maybe sort of like allowing your body's wisdom to show up, allowing, a lot of my people would identify themselves as being channelers, like allowing that channel to open up and like have that like conversation with whatever it is that you're relating to out there, you know, like your ego butts up against something and is like, nope, I can't deal. And to me, I think that that is the downfall of systemizing something that is, as you were saying, like flows with this like life force that we're meant to just sort of like flow with instead of like being like, well, I need to control this because I want predictable outcomes.
right.
Hmm.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting that assertion of control.
Mm.
And I think if we look at where, that's a very common response to being really dysregulated. It's a common response to wanting safety, which is, as far as someone who teaches people how to do trauma resolution work, my thoughts on the word safety, like what does safe actually mean?
Mm.
What's that word that people keep kind of throwing around? And there's this sense of, well, safety sometimes does feel like control. It feels like there's a system and I can rest on the certainty and everything's going to be promised and this is the way that it is and everything's in this little box. And that's great until it doesn't work.
Hmm.
And then you start to look at, okay, wait, why isn't that always working? Well, am I resting on a survival system or am I resting on something that isn't actually informed by my intuition or soul? And that's not to say that like you need systems. Like I teach with systems, I'm sure you teach with systems,
Hmm.
but it's the way that we're taught to identify with them. I think that is what limits people from, I think in a lot of Western schooling is what we're taught to just memorize the system, repeat the system, regurgitate the system.
Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
who is the human being that you're teaching? What
Yeah.
is their innate gifts? What's their innate connection to their soul, their purpose, their whole reason for incarnating on this planet? The
Hmm.
people that they connect with. Like, I mean, one of my favorite things to um, to like water or like help people cultivate intuitively is like what is your natural gifts? Like your natural gifts may look totally different than mine in a session.
Mhm.
Just like, and I don't think we talk about that a lot. Like we think, oh, the healer, but I'm sure you've seen it. I've definitely seen it. There's a lot of different kinds of healers.
Mhm.
They do a lot of different kinds of things. Some are more fiery, some are more watery, some are just like the rooted still earth.
Mhm.
Some have a mixture and pull from multiple different things, and so if you're not working with the human being in front of you and you're just having them fit themselves into a box and then base their level of um, self-importance or value in how good we can fit into this box, then yeah, it gets really confusing and it can bring a lot of insecurity, and I think insecurity that most of us hide
Mhm.
because we're socially conditioned to be like, am I in the box? Am I in the valuable box with the description I'm supposed to have?
Right.
Um, and a lot of that stuff happens in secret, I
Yeah.
think, in the secret little echelons of our psyche.
Mhm. Mhm. And to me, like, this is exactly why when somebody comes to me and, like, they're like, "I really wanna take your course, or I really wanna work with you, but I don't feel like I'm, like, fully fleshed out as a practitioner yet." Like, I don't teach practitioners.
Mhm.
That's why I send them to you, is because I think that our core philosophies are the same, in that our work as coaches and as mentors and guides is not to, like shove a system down your throat. It's really about, can we help you develop your own innate sense of intuition
Mhm.
and like really flow into and accept your unique gifts and perhaps even your unique flaws and your history and your trauma and your entire story. um because I'm not interested in just like regurgitating like the same exact model of a business over and over and over again. Like, I don't want people to just follow, you know, my quote unquote signature formula, because I don't have a signature formula. My signature formula is like, can we get you to a point where you know yourself even more deeply so that you can make like intuitively guided decisions about your business in a way that feels empowering. And I think that that's mirrored in the way that you also teach practitionership. Is like,
Mhm.
yes, of course you teach um frameworks, and like there are certain things around just psychology and the body that people need to understand when they get into healing work. But also I see you as like somebody who leads people back into the story of themselves as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what makes people really good at what they do.
Hmm.
If you reach a like self-knowledge is the way, and all the traditions have known this for a real long time.
Right.
You know, it's not a new thing. I didn't come up with it. It's just the thing that it just works. It makes you an amazing practitioner. But it's also, I think, the balance, and I know you and I both love like feminine and masculine principles, yin and yang. And you need a structure, right? You
Hmm.
need structure to be there, and you need the principles, you need the teachings, and you need the like, the pillars of how things work. Um, or else you just have chaos and
Yeah.
waves and things flowing everywhere. But you also need the feminine, you need the intuition, and we need to nurture that, in business decisions and practitioner cultivation and life choices. Like there's so much about that balance that is, we're starting to get little glimpses of it in the Western world, like, oh, the feminine. What's that mean again? Why are those good values important? Why, like, what did we lose? And how do we find that again? How do we bring it forward? But yeah, I think innately it's each person is their own human. And so I think that's what's beautiful. Like, for instance, we're all in bodies. Like, I am in a physical body, you're in a physical body, my mom and my dad and my partner, and like, we're all in forms, but we're all very different. But we all need to follow the same principles. Like it's great to have your sleep connected to the circadian rhythm, like those kinds of basic truths that are
Mm-hmm.
interconnected and more universal.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think ultimately that's where the balance comes in, is
Yeah.
where we're disconnected from the intuitive nature
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
a certificate and to feel like we're important and to feel like we have the accolades. And I think I mean, we could bring it into this part of the conversation, but like part of what I say to that is, okay, great. Like you could show me someone that's got all the certifications in the world. Are they good at what they do? Are they
Yeah.
embodied in what they do? Have they
Yeah.
fully owned what they do, and do they get results with people in a way that, shows an embodiment of whatever piece of paper you have?
Mm-hmm.
I've
Mm-hmm.
trained with teachers who have no pieces of paper but are way more wise than people that have the pieces of paper. And it's not to discount either one. It's just to
Yeah.
say like embodiment for me is what matters
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think integration, embodiment, and like sort of to piggyback off of what you're saying, like I'm not like an anti-establishment. Like I think that there are some wonderful education systems out there, and it's been interesting leading people through formulating what their next steps in business are, because I've had a couple of clients where they went through my program and then at the end of it decided, like, actually, I don't want to start a business. I want to go back to school. But
Mm,
they were able to make that decision about going back to school from a really embodied place, and, you know, going to the exact school that they wanted to, with the exact intentions that they wanted to go in with, instead of feeling all sort of like muddy and loopy about it. And
mm.
so, like, I'm definitely not I think it can be easy to sort of like ascertain, like, oh, Kat's just like anti-establishment. Like, no, like I think that there's a time and a place, um and for each individual it's going to be really different, right? Like I am really proud of the fact that I went to the school that I went to and have the education that I do. It's been like a foundational building block for everything that I do now. But I also think that integration and embodiment are harder to test. Like, how do you test that? You know? Um, and to me, like when I am choosing a practitioner, I'm gonna always go for the person that I personally feel in my body makes me feel safe,
Mm,
makes me feel like they've done their own integration work. Because if I come up with like a big feeling, I need to trust that that person is not going to be scared of my big feeling. And that requires you as a practitioner to do your own work, to like hold your own anger, hold your own grief, hold your own shame, so that like somebody can come to you and be like, I've been carrying this really heavy load around my entire life and I don't know how to process it. I don't know how and who I can share this with. Like, will you hold this with me? And if I, as a practitioner, haven't done that work, then that's too much for me to hold, you know? And so I
mhm.
think that that's the important piece here, is like, whatever it is that you do, is it embodied? Is it integrated?
Totally. Yeah, I feel like that piece that you just brought up too, around like how do you know how to hold the big stuff? Like big emotions, big anger, big shame, big grief. Um, I mean, big ecstatic states, like there's so many
Yeah.
things that can trigger us. One of the things when we do the first retreat in Phoenix Path is I ask a whole group of people. This is fascinating, by the way. I literally wanted to lead this because I was genuinely curious for myself. I was just astonished what happened. And so I just started doing it at all the first retreats, which is I just have like a whiteboard and I go, okay, tell me what emotions like aren't okay to be experienced, aren't socially acceptable. And you bet your ass every single one of them gets up on that board.
Mm,
And then I ask, which is astonishing. I'm like, okay, so just the whole spectrum of human feeling is not okay, is not allowed. Or you're allowed to have it, but you're only allowed to have like this much of it. and in this
Mhm.
day, you know?
Mhm.
And you watch the vast majority of different people from different cultures, and what is commonly accepted in one culture is not commonly accepted in another culture, or the the way you sexually present or gender or whatever, your presentation of yourself, and how it's allowed for this kind of presentation but not that kind of presentation. And it's just so interesting how confined we put ourselves. But also, then what I do is I ask, okay, what are the hardest emotions for you to hold space for? And
Mm.
I get the same thing from a whole range of
Mm.
people. Some
Mhm.
people are like, I can go into the deepest sadness and darkness, but if someone is in like ecstatic joy, that triggers the hell out of me.
Mm.
Or I can go into, really intense anger, but when someone starts to feel like aliveness or sensuality, I shut down.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of different things depending on our upbringing that will trigger these defense responses in our system where we shut down or we pull back, or um, you don't feel like you know what to do. Like you can go into a freeze response, or all of a sudden someone's reminding you of, your brother, and you don't even know that, but your nervous system is like, "Argh,"
Yeah.
up in arms, and you're supposed to be holding space, but now all of a sudden you're in like a internal psychic battle with
Mhm.
your fear of this person or your judgment of them or taking something they said personally. And so when I think of integration, like that's one of the things that I think about is it's exactly what you said. Like no matter what state that I go into, is this person going to take me emotionally or take me personally? Do I have freedom? Do I have freedom to actually bring all of me and to trust on the other end of that? I'm going to be caught. I'm going to be guided.
Mhm.
Another huge thing I notice is that there's a lot of people who, me included, like I know my own process like the back of my hand. And that can sometimes be a detriment in sessions because I can move through an entire session and look like the session went real well because I moved through all the steps and I know what to do. And if the person leading me isn't super confident in their leadership or they're intimidated by the amount of work I've done on myself, then they won't call me out on things, or they won't slow me down, or they'll think, okay, that session went great. You're the easiest client in the world. And I'll come out of the session being like I'll trick myself. I'll come
Yeah.
out of the session feeling like unsatisfied, or like I didn't even really get seen,
Mhm.
because there's just a little, very advanced trickster
Mhm.
somewhere there to protect. So, yeah, when I think integration and embodiment, it's like it's moving with all of those different energetic states, knowing your personal relationship to them. And then you can apply the tools and the structures and what to do and
Exactly.
what systems in front of you. But yeah, I could give you every structure in the world. And if your whole body and your whole psychology is triggered by the person in front of you and everything in you goes into fight or flight or fawn or freeze,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter what structure I give you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Just out of like sheer curiosity, is there a particular emotion that you find hardest to hold for yourself and for others?
oh man, I feel like I'm sure there's something. I mean, I don't claim to be like fully mastered and enlightened. Um, one thing that I have had to learn, I will say in the past year, is really targeted. There's a certain quality of protector in certain types of people that I actually tend not to work with anymore, and I've had more of a boundary around.
Mm.
But before I didn't have a boundary around it because I lean way more towards like compassionate, nurturing, holding, accepting of all of the different parts, which is why I'm a really good practitioner. But there are boundaries to that.
Mhm.
And one of them that I found um, during my Saturn return last year was if there is someone that has really intelligent protectors that have malicious intent towards me,
Mm.
which I hadn't experienced much of, but I experienced a few times last year. Um, Being able to stand up and say, no,
Mm,
that's not okay. And I think that was compounded for me last year because sometimes this would come up in people who were more readily enticed to get on canceling bandwagons.
mhm,
And so there was definitely a feeling of, ancestrally, I'm Jewish, like getting called out by whole groups of people scares the absolute crap out of my ancestral
yeah.
traditions. And also, it's happened to me in my life. So it just kind of targeted a lot of things. And so there
Mhm,
was a hidden fear of, I'm going to get, if I don't hold this person here, then they're gonna, like, if I create a boundary, this person's gonna turn against me.
mm,
And really, really finding the very sneaky hidden parts that it's like, no, there's certain things that are okay that do happen here, and there's certain things that do not happen here. And so if you
mm,
want to come into my space, into my energy, into my groups, um, and just into my one-on-one sessions, you have
mhm,
to be willing to see those parts of yourself. And if you are unwilling, then with all of the love in my heart, I wish you the best and that this is not the place for that. And
yeah,
so that's a little bit more nuanced. It's not like a specific emotion, but it is a
yeah.
very specific kind of
There's a
psychological.
flavor.
It's
Yeah.
different also, I will say, than testing. You can test me all you want. Like I get why people test healers. Like I get why, you can have your own little moments of like, yeah, but do you really got me? It's like, okay, cool. Like check me out. Check me out.
Mhm,
But if it's more towards I'm going to assert dominance and power over you to hurt you,
mhm,
um, yeah, that was a big, felt like karmic lesson for me over the past couple of
mm.
years. Really
Love
flesh out.
that. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I love it because I feel like I was watching you play with Sacred Rage for a while last
Mhm.
year.
Oh
And
yeah, that's why.
yeah, to me, I feel like it brings that story full circle is like, of course, there's a reason why you're posting about that. And, it absolutely makes sense, given your ancestral background, given your personal history background, like that sacred rage was not something that was acceptable, you
Mhm.
know, and sort of just to like sort of speak on the testing kind of client, I get plenty of those too. And for me, what I have found is that um, there's like a deeply rooted fear of abandonment,
Totally.
and so it's like if I test you hard enough, if I give you the tantruming, most shameful, most like the parts of me that I find to be the most hideous, like, will you still hold me?
Mhm.
Is what I feel like are questions that are being asked when clients are like testing me. And to me, like I can have the deepest compassion for that. Um, but like similar to you, like I do not tolerate like I'm so and like this is something that I kind of like ask my close friends to check me on is like, am I being too rigid here sometimes with my boundaries? Because, there is an aspect of me that like wants to engage in sort of like challenging conversations. Like that really does light up my soul. But recognizing where there's a challenging conversation out of like curiosity and there's a challenging conversation out of like maliciousness is like a place that I've had to like really figure out
Mm,
where that knife's edge lands. And
totally.
you're right, like there's a total like protector part in there, and
Yeah.
I don't engage with that protector part of people.
Yeah, it's like it reminds me of, you know, I'm not saying that I hold nearly the level of skill that some of my teachers who are like 60 and 70 hold, you know. But I know when I come into their space, I am here to learn and I'm here to be open, and they 100% have always allowed me to ask questions, and bring myself. And I've shown all my deepest, ugliest bits, and there's been love, but there's also an inherent respect for the
Hmm.
space.
Hmm.
And there's an attitude. I think that when we hold that attitude as leaders, and this goes into people pleasing, like part of really being trained to be a solid practitioner is not people pleasing with your clients, not going into states where you're just trying to make sure that your client likes what's going on, because all of a sudden there's a strange power dynamic. It can feel very confusing to the client, even if they don't know what's going on. And you can lose your connection to the clarity of what you're offering, what you're going into, the boundaries of your programs and your containers. Um, just due to fear that what of what they think about you. And I think one of those things that, is really, really key is that we understand that our clients are not there to validate us. um, we are here to help them through a process of transformation and healing. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways and levels it can lean towards more of a distorted or disempowered feminine, and more of a distorted, disempowered masculine, or yin and yang, however you want to look at it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it is, it's a learning curve, but knowing how to hold a container as practitioner. I mean, this was a huge thing for me to actually, because I don't normally have clients like that or students like that. And
Hmm.
because I started to, all of a sudden it was realizing, oh, wow, I'm great at space holding, and there's little refinements here. And that's after
Yeah.
14 years, and that's it's to be
Yeah.
expected.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's also why it's really good to know yourself, because I know where that leads into my own personal history. I know why
Hmm.
that's in my process if I look
Hmm.
back at patterns in my life.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we think that our container is professionally. I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I always find it fascinating that we think like, okay, I'm going to enter into a professional space, and now my personal life just is somewhere else. And it's like, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a human being, actually, you're going to get reflections of your distortions and your wounds and the karmic dynamics that are playing out and lessons that you're learning everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like the universe is like, oh, okay, we'll just take a pause on that, and your holographic, attraction field is not going to mirror what your soul's here to learn.
Right.
Because
Right.
you're in a professional life. Like, that happens in containers, it happens in groups, and you can use it. You can really use it if you know how to evolve yourself even more.
Hmm.
Or you can take
Yeah.
it personally and be like, I'm terrible and horrible and I should quit, but I highly suggest not doing that.
Exactly. And to me, like that's like the entire thesis of my life's work is business being a spiritual practice,
Hmm.
is because like I don't know about you, but I've taken all those business courses that tell me like leave the emotions out and these are the structures and these are the systems that you're supposed to do to get to a six-figure business and you know and I started noticing that those things didn't work for me because I would go into a freeze state if somebody like a client I felt like we had a good connection call and then they like didn't reach out to me, and I would go into like fight states when like I would be creating curriculum. And so I was like, there is no way that like the personal can be kept out of the business world. And so it's like, what would happen if I just accepted that that's going to show up and like it's just
Mhm.
another iteration of the same lesson being asked to like can you look at me again, can you look at me with like deeper sort of compassion. And now having been on the other side of many years of business, I'm horrible with numbers and time, but like I can confidently say that my business has led me into lessons that I would have never learned otherwise. And I'm so, so grateful to not just my I think of them as two different things. Like my practitionership, is like one piece of it. And I feel like that has pretty much sort of stayed intact, just in terms of like having my emotions show up in ways that don't feel the most healthy. But like when it comes to my business, like so many patterns around wanting to hide and not wanting to be seen and undervaluing myself and, you know, like comparison, like all that stuff showed up. And so instead of being like, well, what's wrong with me? I decided like pretty much in like 2020, I was like, I'm just going to just accept that this is showing up and like, what can I do differently?
Mhm.
Why is it showing up again? And how can I change this? Because like it was like an anxious attachment like that was coming up. So like if that's coming up again, then how can I engage with it in this realm instead of just in the romantic space, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's such a when you take on the perspective of being a lifelong student, there's so much fruit. There's so much, and when you have the curiosity there, like there's just so much more that you constantly get to see and to learn and to have spaciousness around and
Mhm,
evolve into and be like, "Oh, wow, okay, that's what's going on." Like that's it's like you get to learn the different inner mechanics of yourself and then how that there's this beautifully orchestrated experience with your clients and your partners and your life is like it's got a whole harmony that moves through everything. And so I think
mhm,
because again we have the principles to that. What are the like the noble truths of life that have been passed down to us for a long time by different spiritual traditions, and then what is your lived experience in relationship to your relations and the way you're showing up and
mhm,
huge things. I mean, like basic things too. Are you asking for enough help? Are you
mhm.
taking enough space for yourself? Are you taking care of yourself? Which
Yeah,
can sound like little sentences, but are actually really big deals when it comes to holding
absolutely.
leaders. Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think that like the important part that you said earlier that I've been like in the back of my mind sort of chewing on is like refinement.
Mhm.
I think oftentimes, I don't know, I've personally felt this like, oh my God, I have been doing this healing for so goddamn long. Like when is it done? Like I am done now,
Mhm.
and certainly like that, I don't know, like healing exhaustion comes in for sure.
Mhm.
Um, and like thankfully it's been a while since I've had like a huge sort of like upheaval in my life.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that the refinement means that you get to go back and like bring in like more layers of color and more layers of texture into like emotions that you previously have integrated well. And it's like, oh, okay, so like, can we make that a little bit more refined? And I feel
Mhm.
like it was interesting when you were talking about the whiteboard activity because people don't necessarily think about joy. And I would also put in there like relief and peace
Mhm.
as being hard emotions to work with. But like in my own personal experience, like I feel like peace is the like thing that I'm like struggling with, which sounds like a weird sentence to say. But it's like, like my relationship is going well, my business is going well. I just had the like easiest launch of my entire life. My husband and I are purchasing like our dream property. We have like all these things planned for, and like there's like this protector part that's like, yeah, but you can't really trust that, and like looking and scanning for that next shoe to drop and being like, this can't be real. Like, this can't be true. And I find that like once you sort of like dig through and sort of like work and massage all those layers of like grief and anger and sort of the like more classically like difficult emotions to play with, like underneath that is like, oh hi, I'm happy, and that's also hard.
Yeah. Can you like how much can you expand your capacity for neutrality and pleasure and calm? And I think ultimately, most people are like, oh, trauma work is about all these other big, more um, agitated emotions. And ultimately, that's where it leads into is like, can you have more of a deep relationship with acceptance and receiving and being provided for and letting people in and letting yourself rest into what's here and accepting it and
Mhm.
not needing for it like not needing to prove yourself to have things. And there's so much that goes into like what the reason why a rested nervous system feels very, very skeptical if you've lived in a state that is very not neutral for a
Yeah.
long time. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge part of the practice of all of it. Also, congratulations.
Oh,
That's
thanks.
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it goes so far as to like I feel kind of embarrassed saying this out loud, but like earlier this year, like I was just an asshole to my husband for like a full on like month. And it's just like nitpicking and like thank God he's like the most patient person ever. But like, like when it came down to it, I had a, a friend of mine do a human design reading for me. And like one of my gates is about like the gate of conflict.
Mm,
And that can go several different ways, but like one of the ways it's played out as a gift for me in my life is like I am really good at going into conflict with other people, like meaning like not just like I'm creating waves, but just like if conflict happens, like I'm a solid person to like lean on in those moments.
mhm,
And like my body was just so used to being with people in conflict that like it didn't know how to just like be with the peace. And you know when we got under the layers of it, it was just like my body doesn't feel safe all the time when it's peaceful. And
mhm,
like I can track that back too to like childhood and like family dynamics and sibling dynamics and all that stuff. But like ultimately, like this is where that work needs to happen, both as a business person and as a practitioner. Because like imagine if I can't hold space for somebody's capacity to just like be happy with where they are in life, you know, then I would, as a practitioner, be pushing them to like do the next thing before the time is ready for them to do the next thing, instead of just being able to like slow down and celebrate and be with the energy of the moment, which is just peace and joy and happiness and like, yeah, I guess like celebration.
totally. Yeah, I think that's one of the things also, like, one of the things when I'm teaching people how to go into client strategy is, and in a meta way, like how to go through the course, because it is a pretty intensive course, but
Hmm.
you have to have a balance. I found over not having this balance for a long time
Yeah.
of like enjoying, like have something that like allows you to deeply enjoy life, that allows you to pause, that allows you to, even if it's only an hour out of your week, but hopefully you can find more than an hour out of your week. And most of us can if we look at how much we're on our phones and technology and all this other stuff, to just feel connection to creativity or inspiration or enjoyment, and how common it is to think, oh, we have to keep digging, 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 digging for stuff, because for some people it's actually not that. It's, you
Mhm.
want material to work with, how much can you expand your capacity to be in a surrendered, joyful, peaceful state.
Mhm.
And then the fear that comes up around, like, you can work on all those things. Okay, what's the fear that comes up around not having this, and what's that contraction, and what's that like trying to scan your environment for control. but it's true, if you and I work with a lot of women who, like, in my one-on-one work, it's with a lot of women who are like, I have that's like the main thing that I work with in my one-on-one work. I have a successful business. I know how to, like, my life is running. I have a team I can lean on, and I'm not happy. I feel empty. I feel like I don't even know how to fully receive the life
Mm,
that I have. And I find it interesting that we will create, kind of like what you said with your partner, like, we will literally create things to be upset with, or like have to dig into, or have to figure out, if we're not actually comfortable just kind of like
just
being and
being.
leaving. And it's hard to even notice it when it's
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. That kind of leads me to want to ask about leading, and you can take this either like as a practitioner or as an entrepreneur, like leading from the feminine space or yin space of values and intention. And because I feel like so much
Oops,
of the
sorry,
world
that you
right
just cut
now.
in.
Did I lose you again?
Yeah, I heard leading from the values of the feminine or yin
Okay.
space.
So let me see where I want to back it up to. Sorry, Andre, editing. Um,
Thanks, Andre.
yeah. um, okay. So I feel called to just like dig into, and you can take this either from the practitioner perspective or the entrepreneur perspective
Mhm,
of like leading your work, leading your life from the feminine ideals of values and intention. Because I
mhm,
feel like so much of what is being validated nowadays, I think that this kind of ties back into the conversation about like credentialing and external markers, is very like young, masculine focused and very structure focused.
mhm,
And like, why is it so important to like actually do the slow work of values and intentions?
mhm. I mean, on one level, I think that, we hear the stories a lot of what I just said. Like, you can have the accolades, you can have the money, you can have the car, you can have the house, which are great. It feels really good to have them. Highly suggest finding ways to feel good in the life that you're creating. And if you're creating those things because of insecurity, because you feel like you need to be happy, because you feel like you need to become something in the external world to be valid in the way that society sees you, etc., you can get all that stuff. And believe, I've worked with lots of people. I've been there. Like, you can get all the stuff and still be miserable. And I think part of that comes from not having connection to your values when you go into um, any endeavor, really. I mean,
Mhm.
no, first and foremost, I think knowing what's important to you is incredibly necessary to, and when I say what's important to you, I mean, like, what do you stand for?
Mm,
Like, what's your purpose and your mission here? Because there's a lot of purposes and missions that can be given to you. There's a lot of values that social media will just dole out to you about the way that you should look or dress or talk or be or whatever. Pop culture will give us a lot of different values and things, but I think finding what's most important to us first and foremost, and then aligning with those things first within ourselves, and then in the actions we take in the world and the choices we make in the world, is what actually creates fulfillment. Like,
mhm,
I know for me, the way that I want to be in the world as a leader, and what I feel so deeply in my, like, being that the world needs as leaders, is leaders who are well cultivated, who are connected to integrity, who want and are standing for the highest, most healed, most empowered version of humanity possible, that's most connected to our souls and most connected to our mission on this planet at this time. And so for me, I need to do that. I need to walk the talk of that. And when I am doing that, I feel really freaking good. And I think as practitioners or as business owners, um, the way that you operate in your life, it is what builds confidence. Like, I almost builds confidence is a funny way to say that. It is where you find confidence. It's
Mhm.
by doing those things and standing in those things. And it's very common for us to kind of like lean a little bit. "Oh, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of sacrifice this part of myself just a little bit. And I'm just going to sacrifice this part of myself just because I think there's a social media trend and this person that I'm following is doing the XYZ and they're getting a lot of attention. So maybe I should do it that way." And there's all these little moments where we can start to stray from what's important to us.
Mhm.
And I think when we look at for me, like when I look at the people that inspire me the most, they're very defined in their values. They know, and it's like their relationship to their values, um, and what they want to be and feel, and what they feel like the world needs is like this intimate, deep, ongoing conversation with life and themselves. And then they show up in certain ways. They speak in certain ways. They talk in certain ways. They commit to certain things. They take actions in certain ways.
Mhm.
And all of that is um, what we kind of see and experience on the other end. But it's not because, they're doing it for the approval of other people.
Mhm.
It's because what's important to them is important to them. And so they make it their teacher to
Mhm.
be that way in life. And I think that you can start to see where people's values and your own values, like we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I've been led astray many a time and had to realize that I'm doing something that doesn't actually intrinsically feel like me. But um I think you'll notice over time like some and I want to tread lightly saying this because I'm not trying to like talk crap about different people. Everyone's in their own experience of life. And like there's totally people that I've watched that like, oh, this is a trend, so now I'm doing that, or like this person's popular, so I'm associating and affiliating with them, and now this person's getting canceled, so now I'm not affiliating with them, and now I'm doing and it's like the whole way that their internal world is focused is more based on like, am I accepted and validated by the external world all the
Mhm.
time? How can I keep getting on top?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I trust those people less,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they're on their own journey, but like I don't want to invest in them. I don't feel a continuity in their messaging. I don't feel a continuity in how they show up within themselves. And the people that I do are the people that that are making decisions based on what feels important to their soul mission. And for me,
Mhm.
that's a big thing. Like
Mhm.
you can have a value of like you want success and you want a luxurious, beautiful life, whatever that means to you. To me, that means like a fancy tree house. That may not mean like a mansion or whatever, but like give me like a creek and a stream and a nice like banyan tree house and I'm happy. But whatever that is, you can have those things, but it's how you and your life are relating to and showing up to and speaking to those things. And I
Mhm.
think I know I'm kind of tangenting here, but the last thing I'll say on that is I feel like this is the way I personally feel. I feel like when I engage in social media or in the external world, one of the big things that I am up against, and I don't want to say it that way, but that's how it feels. Pop culture is the same, is I am up against something that is telling me how to be and what to do and what's liked and what's important and what's valuable. And I know in my soul what I feel is important and what's valuable and the things that I want to see in this world. And ultimately that makes me stick out as a leader. People notice that, they resonate with that. That's why people like to be trained by me. That's why people like to work with me because they can feel that in me and they resonate with that. But is it scary? Absolutely. Sometimes it's super
Yeah.
scary to say like things that are not commonly accepted and feel like I'm the only one on a little tiny soapbox screaming into a void of, you know, doing like, should I be doing a TikTok dance while I'm doing it or whatever it is, that's like a benign example, but yeah, I think ultimately it's what makes you stick out as a leader. It's what helps you find your people. And yeah, it's scary because you can feel like does anyone actually care about this? And a lot of people do. A lot of people do. It's just they're also sitting there feeling like they're the only ones that feel
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, living my life from a feminine, like rooted in my like yin, and building my business from yin space, and
Mm.
building my practitionership from yin space, like the word efficiency comes to mind,
Mm, mhm,
which kind of sounds like a yang word. Um, but the reason why I say efficiency, and I love that I get to have this conversation with you specifically, because I'm reflecting back on like when I had my Saturn return, when I was your age, I was that person who was like, well, I did all the things that, my family life at the time, I wasn't into social media. I'm like, I'm still from the generation where like phones didn't exist when we were young. And
mhm.
so, like, I remember getting to that place where I was like, well, my business is successful. My acupuncture business is successful. I'm at the time I was married to a different man. We had bought a house in Santa Cruz, which, if you know anything about California real estate, is just like fucking bananas to do. And like we had sort of like marked off all those pieces. And when I look back on the 30-year-old version of me, it's like, oh, honey, like you just did all the things that I think about my mom as being a really active voice in that space. I think about um, like culture and society being like a more active voice in that space rather than my own sort of internal like intuition and knowing. And, I love that you're sitting here at 30 talking to me about how closely connected you are to your intuition, because it's like, dang, Jess, like when you're my age, like you've just sort of like you've taken a bit more of a shortcut than I've had, you know, which is not to like value or devalue either of our stories, but like I get really excited for, 38-year-old Jess, and like where she's going to be. And so
Aw.
like that's what I think about in terms of like efficiency. And now like the things that bring me joy are like the fucking weirdest shit that like that like honestly I feel like my inner child is so stoked.
Yeah.
I am so like just like a tangible example of that is, like you're happy in a treehouse. Like my husband and I are literally buying our dream property, which has no house. We're gonna have to dig a well. We're gonna have to put in a septic system. We are literally our plan for the next 2 to 3 years is to live out of our trailer in a horse barn. Um, And it's like a fancy horse barn, but like it's still a horse barn. There's like no running water, no septic yet. And we're going to insulate out the tack room where people would normally store their saddles. And that's going to be our bedroom for the next 2 to 3 years. And I am so excited, like so much more excited about this move than any other move that I've made in my life. And other people would look at that and be like, are you fucking crazy? You know? Like, what is wrong with you? And to me, it's like, no, like this is what happens when you get to be fully embodied in the things that bring you joy, is like you get to make those weird choices. And like, I don't give a shit what other people think, like that I'm going to sleep in a tack room.
Yeah, I think that that comes from like actually really knowing yourself.
Hmm.
It's funny when you start to look at um, the things that you're supposed to think are valuable.
Hmm.
And I noticed this with, I have some cousins who they're younger than me. They're like uh, brinking on Gen Z, Gen Alpha, but it's like sweet to watch. Hindsight's always 2020, where like they've got like the chains and the car, like a little bit gangster kind of even though they grew up in West Sonoma County in California, but we'll take it. And uh, and you can feel with the caricature of it, like, oh, this is what you think you're supposed to have to be happy.
Hmm.
And I think that, and if you're creating your life, like you're creating your vision, you're working with people in the way that you most crave and want to work with people. And I think that's also really important to understand, is like, you can have your job title, but like, what do you want the depth of your interactions to be with the people that you're working with? What do you want the feeling of on the other end of your sessions or on the other end of the programs that you're offering? Not just that you're offering the programs or you have that's great. You have a full course. Awesome. You have a successful launch. Great. What do you want to feel in interwoven into what you're spending your precious, precious life force on and in these interconnections with? Because that's where you're going to find your satisfaction,
Yeah.
is knowing what you want in that feeling. And all of the different things, whether it's the car or the how you look or what you think you want, or it's like, it isn't actually about the way anyone tells you to be. It's literally about your experience of how you're spending your life force energy and your time and your space in your life, and then what you get to create from that, which
Yeah.
ultimately, like, can be buying your dream property and renovating a tack room to be the coolest tack room bedroom you've ever seen, and living in a trailer with your partner on land. Like, that sounds amazing to me, but that's not the common thing that we think will create happiness.
Yeah.
And then we have people living in penthouse suites all over the world that are completely unhappy,
Yeah.
addicted to drugs a lot of the time, or all sorts of other things, because they can't fill that void. And I've
Hmm.
had friends that I have watched go down that road,
Yeah.
and it's really sad and lonely when
Yeah.
you are connected from what makes life fulfilling to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's like, to me, what you just said, like, hits it on, like, just strikes home for me, because it's like, when you live a life where you're honoring your essentially like resources, like when you talk about like time and energy, I would also put money in there. Like, you're
Mhm.
honoring your
Right.
resources in a values driven way, then the aligned action, which is more of the yang aspect of it, like, becomes a lot more clear. So,
Mm.
like, yes, we can go to a bank and go get a construction loan and build out a house. But when we crunch the numbers, we're like, okay, so if we wanted to build out a house, it'd be like $250,000 or so. So we can go get a loan for that from the bank. Over the course of that loan, it's going to cost us $600,000 to pay it off.
Mhm.
And so, like, that's not where we want our money to go. And so we're willing to be like, okay, so we're going to just like rough it and glamp it for 2 to 3 years so that we can pay cash for the house, you know? And so, like, when you really sit with the intentionality, and like another big thing that we're really like committed to is living in relationship with the land and homesteading and like living with the cycle of nature and like all these aspects, it makes decision making so much more clear.
Mm.
And I feel that way about, when you can do that in your business, if you can be really, really clear about, let's say, even just the people that you're talking to, instead of just being like, well, anybody is welcome into my space. It's like, no, like, get really clear and specific about who you want to be working with, and
Yeah.
be really, really empowered in your yeses and nos. That changes the aligned actions that you're going to take in your business.
Totally.
If you're really, really clear in how you want to hold space and embody who you are as a practitioner, again, that like sort of like mycelial branch that out, and like your aligned actions are going to be so much more different if you aren't intentional. And so to me, I think that like yin, intention, integration, which are all these like big words that we've been throwing around in this conversation, is like the fundamental first step in doing anything in your life.
Totally. Yeah, I think that that's ultimately the thing that makes you feel most fulfilled.
Mhm.
For me, knowing, this conversation is making me think about like fulfillment, satisfaction, joy, filled up, confident, solid, secure in yourself. This category of feelings and
Mhm.
experiences, they are more yin because they're internal feelings. They're not based on resting on the external world, and they're different for
Yes.
different people. So
Mhm.
what's gonna make me feel fulfilled may be different than you, but do I know for a fact that, especially if you like want to, I don't know, like at least for me, like you want to deliver like really amazing results to your people, the ability to do that is one of the most satiating, fulfilling things for me, because
Mhm.
that is what I'm here to do. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm committed to for as like a life path and career and purpose in this world. And um, nothing can, no amount of, I mean, it's great for me to understand like how to market myself and how to have those conversations and feel confident and clear in my messaging and like have that translate externally into the way that I communicate, and this internal like place that I get to rest, knowing that that's just there. Like no
Mhm.
one can take that away from me. And the
Mhm.
satiation of like knowing the practices that work really well for me, knowing the things that fill me up so, so, so much, that are very simple sometimes, and so simple that I forget them actually sometimes. you know, uh, it just kind of reminds me of like the rat race feeling that I think is what tends to make us forget that stuff.
Mhm.
I got to get to this future moment so that I can feel XYZ. And it's like, okay, but what cultivates something that creates a stable foundation internally so that you can feel XYZ while you're moving to and through life? It's a
Yeah.
totally backwards way of, I think, seeing it in the modern world, but
Yeah.
it's better math. I think it's better math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you know, that's the thing is when you break it down into these like fundamental aspects, it's really fucking simple. It's like
Mhm.
the brain and the doer and the yang part of us that makes things really complicated. But the yang part of us doesn't like complicated either. The yang part of us really likes having clear direction,
Mhm.
and that's what the beauty and the gift of the yin and the feminine is like when you are sitting in your values and you're sitting in your intentions, it gives the yang part of you just like clear mandate, clear direction so that we can
Mhm.
move forward. And to me, like that is like like you can apply that concept to practitionership, business, life, relationship, all those aspects.
Mhm. Totally.
Mhm.
Mm. So good.
Hmm. Well, is there anything else you want to like drop in here in terms of like either a wrap up for you and like highlighting some of the things that you feel like really really important that you just want to make sure that people really get, or
Mm.
anything that we didn't cover that you're just like, oh wait, but
I mean, I think to drive the point home from the beginning of the podcast, which is like if you're worried about not having a certificate or like having a certain title to your name to prove it, I would say like I would point towards cultivation. I would
Mhm,
say, yeah, a certificate's great. And if you actually cultivate yourself in a skill set to master and know every single part of that and know yourself incredibly deeply and know how to dive into places that you're afraid to dive into, a certificate and a piece of paper is not going to allow you just to like, I could go on Canva right now. I can make you a real cool looking certificate. It's not going to give you more confidence.
yeah,
The whole representation of having a certificate for anything is hopefully that on the other side of whatever got you that piece of paper, you feel more connected to yourself, you feel more empowered, you feel more filled up, you feel more hopefully like a badass and more confident in your skill set, and also like really able to go into and do and create the results that you want to through the training. So, one of the things that I talk about a lot is that, yeah, I'll give you, like for me, and I think for any other thing that you choose to do, any other thing that you're like, I need to invest my time, my energy, my money in this so that I have a certain level of value. Um, do that so that, yeah, get your piece of paper, but like do it so that your end result is an embodied state of confidence, knowing, and like not only a grasp, but an ability to wield whatever it is that you're learning, and find a teacher that knows confidently that they can get you those results as long as you work with them and meet them in how they're training you. Because that feeling, it won't matter. I don't hang any of my and I have a lot of them. I don't hang any of them in my room. I don't need to, because I know what I hold. I know what I can create, and I know what I can do. And that's the feeling you're actually looking for. Our society is pointing you towards having a name card and having this and having that all checked off. But I can promise you, I know people with all of those things that, sound like a great space holder. And yeah, anyway, I could go in deeply into that. Like if that was the case, there's a lot of people seeing talk therapists right now, and they're not satisfied fully. That's why the whole coaching industry is here. So yeah, it's more about the feeling that you want. And so get really clear about what that feeling is for yourself and what you want on the other side of whatever kind of training that you do. And yeah, I think that's the main thing that I would want to really
Just drive
drive
it home. Yeah.
home.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for just reconnecting with me. I'm so glad that we got to catch up, that we get to dive into these sort of squishy places. I would love for folks to hear about Phoenix Path. That's the practitioner
Yeah.
training that I recommend to folks when they come into my space and they're like, I don't know how to be a practitioner. Um, so, can you just share a little bit more about the program itself?
Yeah, so Phoenix Path it's a 6-month training. It's a multimodality training. It is trauma informed, but it also trains you to work with trauma, meaning that when core charges come up for people, you know how to go into them in a way that feels not only safe, but like dynamic. You know how to work with what's happening in a space with someone and move them into a place that feels more connected and more in connection with themselves, healed and also resolved in the thing that's coming up. But there's also a lot of leadership techniques, a lot of teaching of attachment wounding, of childhood development, of how to work with different people who have different systems. A lot of it is very somatic based, but there's also a lot of energetic foundations as well in it, and it's an intensive training. So one of the things too that is really that I love about it is some of the students that have loved their experience the most, like they will range from very beginner to I've had my coaching business successful for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and I've just wanted deeper tools for my people to show up with, for my groups, for my programs, for my one-on-ones. And so it works if you want an advanced training. And if you're more towards the beginning, but you've done a bit of emotional work before, then it's great for you. If you're at the very, very, very beginning and you've never touched a single internal emotion or done any introspective work, there's other courses that I have that are more self-paced for that. I have a course called Center that's really good for that. But Phoenix Path is for the someone who wants to be embodied in their leadership and practitioner work with groups and one-on-ones and know how to work with trauma resolution, as well as be trauma informed and have a lot of modalities to use when you
Yeah.
need them in your toolkit.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And how can people find you in the internet world?
Instagram, My name is Jessica Benstock, and on Instagram it's jessica.benstock. And then my website is jessicabenstock.com.
Yay!
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, friend. And yeah, let's not let it go too long till our next
Yeah.
podcast recording and or hangout. So
Yes. Hopefully both.
yeah. So, how was that interview with Jess? I love being in conversation with my podcast listeners. And so, if something pinged for you, if something felt really aligned, if you had a challenging thought come up, I want to hear about it. You can always email me hello@kathosulee.com. I am also really open to feedback. So, if there's something about this episode that struck you in terms of some feedback that you'd like to leave, then I am also really welcome to that as well. Now, before we log off, I want to share with you that as a spiritual business mentor, I am really excited about supporting and training entrepreneurs who are already good practitioners. And so I'm really clear in my scope of practice that I do not train other practitioners. Certainly by going through my one-on-one container or by going through Business Alchemist mentorship, because a huge component of the curriculum is about nervous system regulation, is about tuning into intuition, is about, soul-based alignment. That makes you a better practitioner. But I'm really clear in that I do not train other practitioners, and this is why I'm so grateful that Jess runs the program that she does. She is running a program called the Phoenix Path, and I've coached folks who have come out of that program. There is a depth and a nuance to their understanding and integration of the practices. And she is quite honestly only one of two programs that I personally recommend. And so if you are somebody who is into your personal development work, haven't had a formal structure or a container that have helped you hone that practitionership, then I highly recommend checking out Jess's program. And you can find all that information on her website, which is www.jessicabenstock.com. I hope that was an enlightening conversation for you, and we will chat with you very soon.